Hi everyone, this is Gary D. Tonnencourt from morethanasnapshot.com. Today I wanted to talk about software for a minute. In digital photography, you're really not going to get the most out of your images unless you're doing something to them in some sort of image editing program. So, a lot of people will ask, well, what image editing program should I use? And do I really need to go with something like Photoshop? And that really all depends on what you want to do with your images. Um, there are some free options out there like Picasa, iPhoto, GIMP. And if you're looking for something basic and you want a free program, those are all pretty good choices. But if you're looking for something that's got more features and that you can use reliably and efficiently, you might want to look at Lightroom and Photoshop. Now, again, if you're feeling like you're not quite ready for the full version of Photoshop or maybe even Lightroom, you could use Photoshop Elements. It's an excellent program. It does everything you'd want it to do, except for some of the really advanced stuff, and it's less expensive. But since Adobe has come out with the Creative Cloud, having the bundle with Lightroom and Photoshop for $10 a month is a pretty good deal, and the software is obviously fantastic. Lightroom has made a few mistakes lately with some of their updates, but still overall, it's a great program. And I'm sure they'll be fixing those mistakes. So if we're dealing with just Lightroom and Photoshop, what are the differences and similarities? Well, they both handle editing photos very well. One way I like to try to explain it to people is that Lightroom is made for photographers and the photographer workflow in doing the kinds of things that you would have done in a darkroom. So there's a library for organizing your photos, there's a develop module for doing the editing of your photos, and then a whole bunch of other modules that will help you make photo books and slideshows and printing and all those kinds of things, all very easy to use, especially when you compare it to the full photo version of Photoshop. Now, where Photoshop has some advantages is in when you got to do sort of more precise work. I find that Photoshop is better for doing things like advanced cloning. You can be much more detailed with using layers and layer masks. But all of this advanced stuff that you can do at Photoshop does come at a little bit of a cost in that there's more to know. There's a larger learning curve with the full version of Photoshop. That being said, it is possible to do. It's not it's not a program that you can't learn. It's just got to realize that it's a bit easier to learn Lightroom than it is in Photoshop. So I think you'll find that most photographers will do a lot of their basic workflow in Lightroom because it's fairly simple and it's very efficient to batch process lots of photos. And then when they need to go and do some detailed work like cloning or work where you need to maybe make composites where you're using layers and layer masks to combine things, that's when Photoshop really shines. And the two of them work really well together because they're made by Adobe. So you can easily send one photo from Lightroom to Photoshop and then back from Photoshop to Lightroom without missing a beat. There are a bunch of other differences in the way they handle files. They all handle a variety of files like RAW files, TIFF files, PSD files, JPEGs. That part's all the same. But they handle the files differently. So in Lightroom, everything is based on a catalog, which means that Lightroom makes a database of all of your photos, and every time you make an adjustment to a photo, it just stores that information about how you would change the photo in a database, in what we call the catalog, and it doesn't become a real change until you export the file. So basically everything you do in Lightroom is virtual until you export that final file. Whereas in Photoshop, when you edit a photo, it gets saved as the real file. So In Photoshop, you could end up using up a bit more hard drive space than you would working in Lightroom. Relatively minor differences, I guess. But like I said, both programs are excellent. They work well together, and I think many photographers use both because you'll do all of your basic editing in Lightroom, and then when you have to do that advanced stuff, you have to go to Photoshop. Also, since we're talking about, some things that Photoshop can do that Lightroom can't, Photoshop is also really good for design work. So if you want to make a composite or make some sort of a design with your photos, Photoshop is the program you want to use. Now, if you don't decide to go the route of Lightroom and Photoshop, you could do that design work in Photoshop Elements, as well as doing the basic photo editing. The only problem with Photoshop or Photoshop Elements is it's not quite as efficient for bulk processing a lot of files. So I hope that was a helpful review of both of those programs. And please let me know in the comments down below what software you use and what you're interested in learning about those programs. So again, this has been Gary D. Tonicourt from morethanasnapshot.com.